Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. I'm your host, Pilar, and I'm delighted to have again on the show Robert Glazer, who's the founder and chairman of the board at Acceleration Partners, a global partnership marketing agency. And of course, Bob is also a serial entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, and a best-selling writer. He's written 6 books. And his latest book, which we will be talking a little bit about today, is Elevate Your Team, Empower Your Team to Reach Their Full Potential and Build a Business That Builds Leaders. Well, congratulations, Bob, on building Acceleration Partners to a global company with 300 people in 10 countries, and also getting some high-profile awards along the way, because I remember the first time you came on the show, you had been included in Glassdoor's Employees' Choice Awards for the company, and I see that you've been ranked the number 2 small and medium business CEO by Glassdoor as well. I'm delighted to have you on the show.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I decided to go out on top. It's been a few years. Yeah, a lot's gone on, but thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, and thanks very much. The last time you were here, it was November 2020. So, yes, as you said, in your words, it's been a pandemic.
Yeah, it's been a pandemic. Well, I'm glad we figured all the tech issues we've had.
Yes, as listeners, we were here going, Anyway, this is the joy of podcasting and the wonders of being able to record. But Bob, the last few years, of course, have been hard from everyone. How has your workforce evolved, including your setup, your hybrid global setup?
Yeah, so it was interesting, right? We had a huge advantage going into the pandemic because, we had been doing this for 10 years. I mean, we used to hide it from clients because we didn't want them to think negatively of us. And then, I was writing a book on remote work and giving keynotes, and people were asking me about it. And then, like anything, I think, so we really knew how to work remotely and we need to do it better. From a competitive advantage standpoint, though, then everyone said, oh, we're remote too. And I think, that's sorting itself out between the companies that do it well and just do it. But everyone suddenly, oh, you can work from here. And so I think particularly in the whole Great Resignation phase, it was hard for people to distinguish between good and bad. So, it's been crazy supply and demand swings the last couple of years. I think no matter what business you are in, whether it's going great or not going well, it has been a challenge in one way or another, right? To get parts or supplies or run your factories 24 hours a day. So as someone who tries to think and plan long term, I think it's been hard to have more than 3 to 6 month windows without knowing which way the winds are going to blow.
Well, congratulations on still being sane, actually.
Barely, yeah.
But something that, and I think I get confused because I follow your podcast and I read I'm also subscribed to your newsletter, and also I've been reading, I didn't get through the whole book yet because I've been caught out by the new year. But I did read something that you had 170 employees in 2019, and now there's 300, but some were able to thrive in these conditions and some not.
Yeah. Can
you tell us a little bit about how that looked like?
You mean the conditions of growth or the conditions of the pandemic, or both?
Yeah. That's a very good point, because, and actually I'm always calling out people when they talk about remote, do you talk about remote pandemic or pandemic? So both, basically. Growth, both, yeah.
I mean, I actually think the answer is the same. I think people that are willing to learn, willing to change, willing to adapt, nothing is the same. I mean, unless you're running a family business where you harvest the olives every year off the tree at the same time, the speed of business. And so I think the one thing about the pandemic that was different was I definitely saw a difference with people who had faced some sort of adversity, and some people, they didn't even believe what was going on when it was going on, because they, 10 years of a great job market, they hadn't seen any downturns, people were saying there's going to be a recession. Well, what's that? So there was a facet of, I think, people I knew, particularly who came from more challenges, felt like, I think, had more of the capacity to handle it. But I think in general, people who really hold on to the past, they struggle with change. They want it to be how it was. But sadly, that's just not how life works. And so I think those people who, again, learn and evolve and move forward have been able to thrive. And others, again, if you love working for a 100-person company and the company becomes a 300-person company, the good decision for you may to be go work for another 100-person company. I totally get that. It's hard to be everything to everyone. In fact, I think one of the reasons why I think we have a great culture, I would argue that culture is great for about 2% of the people who align to our values and how we work and what we do. And it's our job to find those people. We're not great for everyone. We have a certain value proposition, a certain way of working that appeals to certain people. And, we want to make sure that if people got that wrong, that they realize that that's not going to change, and we help them find something different.
Nice. And of course, the last time you were on the show, you were talking all about culture as well. So makes complete sense. And so it makes sense that once you've got those people who align with your values, who want to work, who are okay with growth, and they just can stay in the company regardless. Carry on.
It's so much of the remote work stuff is underpinned based on culture. So I always for me, it's like these two concrete examples and talking to all these companies. Let's pretend to before the pandemic, and I'll put myself in the villain role, right? I run the company with very low trust, with micromanagers, with toxic people, whatever, and then suddenly, with not clear values, not clear goals, we all have to work from home and can't see each other. Do we think that that's going to go well? And you run the company, and it's high trust, high communication, outcome orientation, great leaders, empowerment, delegation. The transition to remote work in that chaotic environment was just a lot better, right? You already so all that did was just, I always say when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing their bathing suit, and I think that was a lot of what we saw.
And just to recap your company, you are in a number of countries, 10 countries. Are you still, when the first time I spoke to you, you had hubs kind of thing? Is now more, how did it still?
No, it's still hubs. Look, hiring is complicated, particularly in the States. Each state is coming up with new regulations each week. And so I actually don't believe in hiring people anywhere. I think the reality of supporting that, when you and I last spoke, right, you would talk to, I remember talking on a panel with a gentleman who was an exemplar of a remote company. And he's like, we have people in 100 countries and they do whatever they want. And they're all set up as independent contractors and all this stuff. And afterwards I said to him, that's basically illegal. No one's cared for 10 years, but the whole structure of the company is not legal. They're all full-time employees as contractors. But now after COVID, everyone's looking at this. The countries want their tax revenue. The states in the US want their tax revenue. So I actually think the notion, of telling people they can work anywhere is really misguided, because there are huge legal implications, tax implications, IP implications of, someone once told me their dev team had moved from Canada to France, and they paid them as contractors or something, and they basically owned all the IP under French law, and they had to buy it back from them. So we try to focus on those hubs and in and around those hubs. And we have approved places where you can work from. I mean, during the pandemic, people were moving around, but we can't have people going to Russia or Iran or there's things that you could really get in trouble for.
It's complicated. And I think that the pandemic, because I imagine a lot of laws were relaxed during that time.
The laws always existed.
Yes.
No one enforced them because it was again, this guy on the podcast was saying, was putting out his model, and a lawyer was on the podcast too. And afterwards I was like, I just got to let you know, I think what you just said is totally legal based on my understanding of it.
It's complicated. And I think it's HubSpot also have made this very clear. You can work for us from these countries where We've got HQ. Yeah. So just wanted to tap into that, just to give us a sense of where and how your people might be distributed, interacting, etc. And so going back to this sense of getting the people who are aligned with your values on board, and the fact that it's not for everyone, is that then, going back to your book, Elevate Your Team, is it then about building the capacity of that workforce in 4 different ways so that they stay with you and grow with you and thrive with you as much as possible, I imagine?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Well,
But Elevate was about these four building capacity in these four ways, really targeted at personal leadership and how you could approach your team. When I started to look at organizationally some of the things that we were doing and doing differently, I realized that was our sort of training playbook and that was our operating manual for how to apply those principles to the organization. And again, how do you build a company and grow a company? By growing the team, right? Kind of like grow on their backs, not decide that you're going to grow and churn and burn and spit out the employees as you break them, which has been a lot of the playbook for the last 10 years. And after the pandemic, I just don't think it's going to work anymore. I think people are burnt out. And if you just think people are going to work harder, it's going to be a long haul.
of that. So what are you've got the four building blocks, which are part of Elevate and also Elevate Your Team, that where you're thinking, okay, the teams need to be building this capacity. Can you talk us through the four
Sure.
bits? I'll let you tell us what they are.
Yeah. So same as Elevate. So spiritual capacity, I think for a lot is core values, understanding what you want most, understanding sort of who you are at your core. Intellectual capacity is about how you improve your operating system. How do you learn, plan, execute, get better with discipline? Once you know what you want, how do you get it? Physical capacity is more direct, mental and physical well-being. And emotional is your relationships, how you relate to the things, people around you, things that you don't control otherwise. So in the context of an organization, I think spiritual capacity is helping your leaders figure out who they are, helping them figure out their core values, their strengths. That there is not a acceleration partners, archetype of a leader. We've always believed people are going to be the best leaders, authentic leaders, if they understand who they are. And I think that understanding your core values is key in that. So we've worked with people to understand that, understand their strengths, communicate those with their team, learn their why, all that stuff. Intellectual, I think, in the organizational capacity is how do you create an organization that is a lot about learning. It knows how to have feedback, give feedback, right? You can't have kind of learning without feedback. How do you teach people skills holistically, like discipline and morning routine and financial acumen and stuff that would make them better in their job, but would make them better outside of their job? Physical capacity, again, focusing on the mental and physical health of the team, letting people separate, letting them go on vacation, not emailing people all night, giving people the time to be healthy. Because again, no one is like exhausted, out of shape, a mess, high stress, and then shows up to work and those things are different, particularly when showing up to work means getting out of bed and turning on your computer, right? These things are pretty holistic. And then again, I think if, when you think about emotional capacity in the organization, I think one of the key tenets is psychological safety. Like, how do you develop a place where people can have difficult conversations, be safe, where they learn to focus on what they control? I give a few examples in the book, particularly around sales teams and things I've seen where, organizations where when anything goes wrong, or sales particularly, just they always blame external factors, right? So how do you take that off the table as a leader? Or no, we lost the deal. Why did we lose the deal? Like, what could we have done better? How are we going to show up differently? Like, I tell a story of a company that was frustrated that they were losing, that we were doing more business with a partner than them. So they invented this narrative that we were getting kickbacks from this company. And it was like brought to us at a conference and they were sharing it. I was like, wow, what a like an example of a low capacity organization. Like, we had told them why we were doing more business with the partner. The partner was meeting with us. They were working with us on sales pitches. They just, at some point were like, look, well, like, let's just tell people that like they're getting kickbacks from them, because that puts the onus on them and not on us to do anything. So that's sort of a high level look at the framework. There's a lot deeper examples, particularly around communication and feedback and things like that.
And before we go into, I want to ask you more about emotional capacity, because I think emotional capacity of a team is something that
the hardest,
up to recently has been a bit overlooked, and it's an interesting concept. Do you think that this capacity building, do we need to approach it differently if we are working in a remote environment, a hybrid environment? How does location come into this, do you think? Does it?
It does. Look, I think it's harder to do remotely. I'm a big fan of teams getting together and having those, I'm helping a bunch of our teams facilitate those offsites, because it's doing those exercises late at night with a glass of wine or beer, sitting around and talking about something. And I think it's harder to open up on Zoom, than it is in person. You're missing certain, chemicals and stuff that happen in human interaction, pheromones that don't happen, online. So yeah, I think if you're looking for people to stay and be connected to your organization, I mean, we get teams together, we get the whole company together. It costs a lot more than offices. People always used to say, "Oh, you must save so much money," but I think I haven't seen the data, but I think there's some theories that teams that don't meet each other and interact will feel less emotionally connected, and it'll be easier to move on and take a different job, right? This is where you have to decide what kind of company you're running, right? You might run a company that's software engineers and they're remote, and you lose one and you swap one in, but if some leaders have said to me, well, I'm trying to get people to, this person just wants to do their job and not engage and not come to anything. And I was like, I mean, is that your culture or is that not your culture? Because if that's not your culture, then that person's not the right fit for how you're running your business. So this goes to particularly in the new world of kind of remote, hybrid, or in person. You got to pick a strategy, like enough hedging, and then you got to support that strategy. It's hard to support the strategy if you haven't even picked it. I mean, there's 10 different definitions of hybrid that I've heard of.
I think we must allow people to be bold in their choices, and that actually whatever they go for, it's okay. And
and then everyone will reshuffle. Look, some people are like, look, we're all back in the office, and I might not believe that's the right choice, but at least they're clear, and those people can make a decision or otherwise. You got people who have moved and we're hybrid, and what does that mean? Like, can you call me into the office? Are you going to tell me one day that I have to come in because I live 2 hours away? That's what makes people nervous and anxious, is that I think leaders are being chicken, and they're not like, put a stake in the ground. You're going to lose a third of your people, but you're going to get a different third that says, that's what I really want. And it's better. You probably have a lot of dead people walking in your organization, right? That are just waiting for, as soon as you put the flag in they're already half gone. They're just waiting for you to decide what your choice is.
So starting out, go there. I mean, this goes, I imagine, when we're talking about leadership, and actually also when we talk about team building, this emotional capacity, which will actually take us through these kind of times as well. I've got a note here, something that you mentioned. Well, you mentioned the whole vulnerability aspect as a leader, but what about as teams? What does it mean to be vulnerable in a team? Or what does it mean to be vulnerable leading a team? Actually, both would be great.
I think it means to show up as yourself, to share things honestly, to share humility. I think this goes with an intellectual capacity. Show your mistakes, like have those conversations. I think, and again, create that culture of safety. I heard a great suggestion that someone said once, which is, if you want to know whether there's psychological safety on your team, ask people to do something that's impossible and see if anyone argues with you.
I love
it. Right? If you really want to see whether people are scared of you or whatever, like ask them to do something totally illogical and like see if people say something or they just nod along. So look, I think it's fine for leaders to make decisions, but when people won't speak up or they don't feel comfortable, they feel there are repercussions to doing that. It has a real impact on. And I think psychological safety is just sort of organizational trust at scale, right? It's how do you take the type of trust you would have between one or two people and make that kind of the default operating system for the organization.
And in addition to, I mean, you mentioned in the book role modeling that vulnerability. What else do we want to be looking at when we connect with the team to start building? Well, actually, maybe first we need to assess the kind of psychological safety we've got at the moment to know which way to go, no?
Yeah, look, a lot of this is more, so the leader always goes first. I think if you're ever asking a question or asking people to share, the depth of the leader's answer will determine the depth of the group's answer. And I remember someone doing an exercise on this. He went around with a bunch of us when we were doing an offsite and said something people don't know about you, and it was like, I don't know, gymnastics when I was younger. Yes. Everyone were around. Then the second time it was something like, my wife cheated on me and that was the reason for our divorce and we left 10 years ago. And then the things the second time were 10 times deeper, right? So everyone sort of emulates the leader and where the leader takes that, but that's how you establish those trust and relationships, and people feel that you're approachable. They feel, again, they can say anything. People don't have to agree, but there's no threat, there's no reprisal, from it, and people give feedback all the time, and we always say it's in 3 groups. Awesome, thanks, and we'll fix that. Awesome, thanks, this is a longer term thing and we're dealing with it. Or thank you, but we're not going to change that. Like we should get offices. No, if you're looking for offices, like it's okay to say you're not going to do something, but you still, thank people for the feedback. When I hear stuff that's passed up or stuff like, I might have said something that didn't land correctly, I actually encourage the person to have, if it's the youngest employee, whatever, reach out to me directly, have a conversation. Like I want them to see that they could pick up the phone, I'm more than willing to have that conversation. Then hopefully they'll tell that to other people. I mean, I don't get it right. But it's helpful to know whether did I miss it with 2% of the people or did I miss it with like 40% of the people, because those would be kind of different.
And in a way, building that psychological safety is a very great avenue also for ensuring that you're getting feedback without having to ask for it in a way. That way.
Exactly. That my friend has shared this concept of front of the t-shirt and back of the t-shirt, right? We all know what's on the front of the t-shirt, but like, are people going to tell you what's on the back? Everyone else knows it, but you're not saying it.
And so around this as well, something that is strong in the book and probably a driving force for a lot of the capacity building as well is being able to promote the leaders within the company.
Yeah.
Is this something you've always thought of, seen, or is this something that you've really been working on? Tell us.
I mean, I actually didn't categorize it until I wrote the book, but there's 3 types of organizations, what I call sort of star stiflers, catch and release, and pure meritocracy. And I don't think you're necessarily one or the other. You can be multiple. So star stifler was my first job that I worked. There was an entrenched group of people who had very little external value, that were very good at keeping themselves in place and knew the politics of the organization. And I worked with all of these incredibly talented people who have gone on to do amazing things while that company went bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
And they all just were, it was very clear that like, talent was a threat. So catch and release, which I think we've, tried to be over the years, is like, look, if we develop people and we don't have the right opportunity, like we are happy to see them go on and be successful elsewhere. It's that old adage, what if the CEO and the CFO are talking, and what happens if we train them and they leave? And he says, what happens if we don't train them and they stay? So, the notion that like you're going to grow people and, then if there's not a place for them, you're happy to see them go. The catch in that is that sometimes they are a place for them. They are better than someone on the team. You're just not willing to make that move. And, pure meritocracy is, again, an organization that just the best person rises, and you're willing to do that. And without giving too much, I give an example of the book of, people don't like sports analogies, but I think this one is poignant. Almost 20 years ago, the New England Patriots had the most expensive quarterback in the league. They just signed him to a long-term deal. He got hurt in the 4th game. And Bill Belichick, the coach of the Patriots, has always had a no sunk cost philosophy. It doesn't matter whether you're paid a lot or a little, or drafted at the top or drafted at the end. The best person plays and the best person starts, right? And sports are better at this than business. You understand that if you're going through a cold streak in sports, you're going to go on the bench. So Drew's out for 4 or 5 games. He comes back. The 6th round pick, gawky 6th round pick, has taken his place and is playing really well. And to everyone's surprise, they decide to go with that 6th round pick the rest of the season, and they win the Super Bowl. His name is Tom Brady, and probably the best player of all time, right? And it was most people would have kept Tom Brady on the bench, but Bill Belichick as a leader was like, I'm going with the talent, right? I'm going with who's better. So the other thing I say is I don't think you can be pure meritocracy all the time. I think it'd be really disruptive for everyone to feel that their jobs are always in jeopardy and someone's coming up. And so it's not an all or nothing, but to me, that's less of an issue than someone constraining talent, like, and seeing that talent to go start for the other team and be an all-star, right? That's not, companies celebrate, as I've said, it's a nuanced thing. It's nice to celebrate helping people go out there, but you don't want to see people you don't want to see a stream of people starting for the other teams that came from your organization.
So what are some of the things then you can do? Because my first reaction was you just mentioned this. Yes, they might be very talented. We want to keep them. It'd be great if they stayed, but where is the room at the moment in the organization? And do we replace?
Well,
How can that? I mean, it's very
this
nuanced.
is a couple of things. This is difficult. I think there's when think beyond their function, think organizational why. Like if you have great talent, we just identified a high potential group of talent across our organization, and the instructions from our people team were everyone is responsible for training them, and they should not be siloed in terms of their opportunities. Right? We should be. These are the best people we have coming up, and we want to see them wherever it might fit. Like you can't hog them, basically. And and the other thing I think, though, this is where having assessments, being honest with yourself. I decided at some point there was someone better for my job than me, and really realizing what do I want to do. I think that's part of having higher emotional capacity and having these discussions and realizing, oh, I want to do this. I don't want to do that. This person is better suited for that. Or it's time for me to take on a new and different challenge. So, I mean, we try to, it's kind of like the mantra in the military, kind of God, unit, country. I mean, we try to approach things from what's best for the organization, what's best for the team, what's best for the individual. Like that's sort of the order. And sometimes an individual moving up is best for the team and the organization. It's just not best for another individual, but that's not a fair decision to make for the organization if you're just trying to protect one person.
Very complex. So you just mentioned, and that was my next my next question. Well, you talk about leading by example, and indeed, if we're talking about this is something you've been doing. You mentioned you're stepping away as CEO so that Matt Wool can take over. Is that right? Has that been recent?
Yeah, so Matt and I started a 2-year transition in I can't get my years right. Like a 2009, it's 2019. I keep forgetting that it's like 10 years. I've said like 2008 recently when I meant 18 in 2019. So we first spoke about it. We worked on a 2-year plan. We actually brought in an investor during that time and they were fully on board of it. And I looked at what the organization needed. I looked at the growth. I looked at what was required operationally, what I like to do. And more of the CEO job was not what I like to do. And I think a lot of people hold on, right? The salesperson moves into the CEO role, someone else does this, and they're not super objective in terms of, again, what does the organization need? Back to the same test that I created, and what do I want to do? And I looked at it and I was like, you know what, this is really Matt runs the day to day, and I think the person who runs the day to day of this organization should be the CEO and is more qualified to do that. So, but we did that intentionally. We did that over time, and he's really stepped into that role. And I have transitioned and taken on being the head of the board and leading M&A. And again, it was a new challenge for me. I mean, 14 years of doing the same role. Like I was looking to do something a little bit different. So there was a win-win in there. And having those people on our bench, who were able to step up and do that was obviously hugely helpful as well.
And when was this officially? When was your last day as CEO?
My last day of CEO was December 17th, I think, 2021. So coming
2021.
Just past a year.
So it's been a year. And what did you learn about yourself during that year? Because must have been very different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I was a little burnt out after, a year of COVID, and then even the chaos of the year after that, which was all the snapback stuff. I mean, I had read enough stories. I knew enough, that people struggle, particularly because they're losing their platform. I think I was still involved with the business. I had my reading and writing and other stuff, but there were some moments where my mind and body were not on the same page. I mean, I had been working 7 days a week for almost 10 years to be able to write all the books and do all of that stuff and do the day job. And so I just decided to kind of pull that back down to a more reasonable thing. And my mind was like, this is great, but I think my body had some problems adjusting. Like I had started having all these different, like nothing, just a lot of aches and pains. And I was going to physical therapy. And I think it was an actual change of, you're doing something and you're running on adrenaline, you try to slow it down. So there's been some mental and physical changes that I've had to adapt to. I think the one thing that I've done successfully, or hopefully more than one, but in watching some things, is I really, when we made the change, we had already changed a bunch of things behind the scene, but it was very clear that I stepped out of certain meetings, I stepped out of certain rooms, I dropped down 2 days. Like I wanted to make it very clear that like Matt was in charge, because if that wasn't a clean, break over, you'd have people still like, it's a weird thing for people after 10 years of one day or other. Now, most of them reported to Matt and stuff anyway, but I think a lot of people probably didn't believe me, so that changed. But I've really tried to stay out of his way. When I see things with people on his team or whatever, I take them to him and not to them, so that, he can have that discussion or otherwise. So, that there's some things you got to do there to make sure you're not setting up that person for second guessing or for failure.
It's really important. It's something sometimes not very much talked about when you step away from a role that you've been holding for a while, that very deliberately giving the other person the space and doing stuff that's,
Yeah. I was on the board of an organization, EO, which you may have heard of, and I was the president. And often the president sits, at the stays on the board and does like a different role afterwards, right? So you go from one meeting where you're the president and everyone's listening to the next meeting where the membership chair. And I just felt like that was really weird. I felt like even if you want to take that role, like when we switched over, like I did not show up for the next 5 meetings, like because you want the people in the room to look at that person, not look around. Like you just need to you need to make the break there. If you're going to do that. We did the 2 years of work behind the scenes. In fact, when we announced it to the company, I think people were like, what's going to change? And we're like, well, what you didn't notice is that we changed all the reporting over the last year. Matt's been leading the company calls. We've already done all of this. We've actually already done all the changes slowly and steadily. So we're not announcing that anything's changing today. We're finally just making official. And I think that was kind of interesting for people to see. We had been playing sleight of hand with them behind the scenes.
Well, thanks for that. I think that's always, I find that very interesting. I'm also thinking of another side of that kind of thing is people going into management position or leadership positions as part of their growth, and then realizing that actually that's not what they want to do. They don't want to be leading a team. I think that's also
such a frequent mistake. Yeah.
Yes, but sometimes there's nowhere to go if you want to progress in your career.
Yeah, and that's the organization's fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look, there are people. Becoming a leader means changing all of your reward centers from getting rewarded for what you do to getting rewarded for the performance of your team. And in fact, I actually think way too many organizations evaluate leaders based on their individual performance and not how they're doing as leaders, which is a massive miss.
Yes.
So you should continue to have growth opportunities for individual contributors. Tend to be producers, right? They tend to be sales or engineering. So if they're developing more and better code, they're selling more, they're marketing more, like, I don't know why you would limit their compensation or upside, but just making them into a leader. I think some people honestly don't know too that they're not going to like leading. So you need a fail safe, or you need an an off ramp that lets them, say, have a conversation. Again, this goes to vulnerability and emotional capacity. Like, hey, Pilar, like, this doesn't seem to be working. And honestly, this doesn't seem to be you. We've had that conversation. You're someone who really likes to get the blame, the praise, the quota, to sell it. Like, that's not leadership. Like, I think you might be a lot happier if we could put you in a role that looks like this.
Yeah, when we crack that one, the world of work will be a better place.
There's some good articles. HBS one on I think, again, in your organization, just making sure there is an individual contributor path, and that you don't cap people out. You don't force them into leadership. It's really just not it's a suboptimal outcome.
Right. So, started to see where I'm going to start to wrap up the conversation, just basically for time, because all of this is just so fascinating. But I do, of course, listen to Elevate, your podcast, where you you have such high profile guests. It's and the thing is that I love the talking about vulnerability. Those conversations, they're also quite long, which means that people start to open up. I love it. I think that's what's great about long conversations. And well, congratulations for the 1 million downloads.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to believe, and I think like again, like any compounding, right? It was like it the last year was 50% of the growth. So it's just the way compound interest works.
And as well as a sort of inspiration and development for listeners, I imagine that also been a source of inspiration and development for you. I don't know how much are you learning, and how much talking to so many people has influenced your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great question, and when people kind of reach out about guests, and I've changed. One of the things I talked about in the article was I cut the episodes in half, and I saw it double because it actually forced me to have the conversations that I want to have. So my threshold is like, what is a really interesting conversation that I want to have with someone who I admire, that I think that other people could benefit from, and so it's hard for people, but having to say no to a lot of people. And I had conversations this morning, but there's just a certain, I'm only doing 20 a year, and that is forcing me to be very judicial with, and a lot, half of those are more people, executives and running, and half maybe are kind of an expert in something. So I think that's forced me to think very carefully how I want to use those slots. And, I used to do some swapping with people, and I get on, I wouldn't be so excited. Like, I want to be really excited. I want to be doing hours of research, being like, this is my one shot to talk to this person. I mean, I was just listening to the episode. I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes I listen to my podcast a lot because when I can listen to the guest, but I'm also looking at the timing, at the question. I really like afterwards to listen to them. And I was listening to Stanley McChrystal talk about risk and COVID, and I was like, oh, I forgot all these things. Like, these are, I mean, I'm fast forwarding through myself, but I really wanted to listen to that person without looking at the time or the script or anything like that.
Yeah, I picked up my show notes because of that. I used to have someone else doing the show notes, and when I'm going to do it myself, because otherwise I don't listen back. So now I have to listen back and make notes. So that's, yes, I understand that. So what, any moments that have stayed with you from the recordings, from the podcast, either because of how great they were or because they made you feel uncomfortable in some way?
No, look, the only uncomfortable ones are the episodes that didn't run.
Yeah, that's okay.
I've had a couple where I'm sure, like, people who just answer a question with a finite answer, and you have 20 questions, and it's like there's no dialogue, and you're like, uh-oh, this is going to go really quickly. And I had someone once who was just selling nonstop, and I was like, it's funny, I don't even mention it, and then I wait to see what my editor, and he's like, we can't use this. Like, this is terrible. But no, I'm Derek Sivers was one of my favorite ones. Like, he's just such a brilliant thinker, and the hell yeah or no. And one of my favorite things, again, talk about sort of humility and vulnerability, where I introduced him as bio as an entrepreneur, because he sold this company, I think, too, really successfully. And he's like, I haven't started a business in 10 years. I'm not an entrepreneur. Like, that's something you have to keep earning. Like, I'm a musician now and an author. And I just think, like, that notion of your identity, like not holding on to like the high school victory, but like, who are you today and what are you doing? That has always stayed with me, that comment that he said.
Great. Well, I think that is a fantastic note to end on. Well, actually, I've got one more question. You read a lot.
Yeah.
And I would love it if you could recommend one or two books to our listeners, either about leadership or working with a distributed workforce. And of course, just a reminder of How to Thrive in a Virtual Workforce is one of Bob's books. We'll put a link to your books in the show notes. But one or two books that you can recommend to me and our listeners?
Yeah, so this is, in general, I always recommend this book. I just tracked down the authors and had them on. I don't know if you listened to it. I actually have it over. I have my top 20 books next to my desk, but it's called Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. And it's actually the definitive book on like cognitive dissonance. Like, what is it? How does it manifest? I don't think there's anything more prevalent in life and leadership and mistakes in our relationships than cognitive dissonance, and learning how to see it in other people, see it in yourselves. Like, it is the invisible hand behind so many things. So I that's probably one of the books I gift the most. I love it. And it's a very catchy title too.
I love it. I will put that on my wish list, which is so full. Excellent. Well, robertglazer.com if listeners want to get in contact with you. Are you busy on social media networks? Or?
Yeah, I'm on both of my handles. You can find them on robertglazer.com in the upper right.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, and congratulations on the last year, on the 6 books, and on your Elevate Your Team.
Thanks, Pilar.
A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode, and thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.